Okay, hello everybody. First of all, dober dan. Dali was interesseren umietne intelligencia. Thank you so much for coming. I'm really excited to talk to you about artificial intelligence and what that means for the customer experience. We hear so much conversation around AI and all of the kind of impacting technologies that cross over with it. So I just think it's really worth kind of continuing that conversation, particularly around artificial intelligence, which for me is around what it means to humanize artificial intelligence and the customer experience as a whole. I think AI gets a bit of a bad reputation in a lot of respects in terms of all of the risk and potential harm it can do. And actually, there's so much good that can be done with artificial intelligence and is already being done. So for me, artificial really stems from that notion. And to give a little background about myself, I started out in advertising and media and marketing. So I really didn't know anything about AI and just was a really casual reader, just really enjoyed reading about it through Wired, through MIT Review, and then eventually just built up to taking my master's in it. So I absolutely understand the journey of knowing nothing about AI and then becoming fully immersed in it. So if I can learn it, anyone can, and hopefully that's a good motivation for all of you for the next 40 minutes or so. So I guess my first questions would be around who here knows about machine learning, deep learning, the difference between them all. Okay, this man in front of me, you are ready to take the stage and present to us all. He knows it all. No, that's brilliant. And that is exactly kind of, the hands that have come up already in the room, just really indicative of the industry as a whole. It's very varied and continues to be growing. More importantly, in terms of the terminology that we hear and see for AI, I think it's really good to first just really demystify each of these different basically concepts because they are used in a very interchangeable way, which leads to a lot of confusion. So to start off, artificial intelligence, this really involves machines that can essentially mimic human behavior. And when we talk about that, we mean AI for me is the science and engineering of what it means to mimic intelligence within machines. And this is a really cornerstone piece of what makes AI so powerful. But within artificial intelligence, we actually have a few subsets of technologies and techniques behind that as well. One of those being machine learning and deep learning, which I'm sure everyone here will have heard in passing at some point or another. And to be honest, this is a collection of statistical models and algorithms, but in plain English, it just really means programs that can consume data and then also make predictions, so pattern recognition in that as well. And I think just to be really clear, the key differences between things like machine learning and deep learning are purely based on the way that the data is presented. So this is all underpinned by that foundational layer of data. So when we talk about machine learning, that is how we take on different data sets, but then actually deep learning is that ability to build off things that we call neural networks. So this is the first step that we have in AI towards that mimicking of the neurons in the human brain. So to put that into context, when you think of neural networks, it is what is in the name, nets. And the way that I like to think about it, because I love food, is like a cake. So neural nets usually have around 50 or 60, maybe, in a casual, consumer-based amateur net. And then companies like Facebook or Google will have about 150 nets or layers in their cake. So that gives you a sense of the scale and difference between different neural networks and also different scales of deep learning, which is why we see so many differences between smaller scale companies using deep learning and global corporations using it on a much different scale. But the key there is that it is and can be used by different shapes and sizes of businesses all over. So that's just a little bit around the terms. And in terms of how AI is already with us, it is actually all around us already. So we can see AI has already really been the advent since Google Maps that we use to navigate us to where we need to go. Machine learning comes into effect if ever we've watched a Netflix TV show, you've entered your playlists on Spotify. Those recommendations that are coming through to us and kind of steering our days as we go are purely machine learning based. And then we have things like deep learning again, which, like I mentioned before, is the real kind of essence of what it means to mimic the human brain, and that comes through with things like AR and augmented reality filters. That ability to use computer vision is really powered by the technique that is deep learning. And AI is actually forecast to generate 15.7 trillion to the economy by 2030. Now, if I'm being honest, I hate slides like these. They give you a massive number. Who's going to check it in 2030? I'm not sure. But what it does tell us is that the impact that is at large in terms of, the economic value, and also some of the pointers that we'll cover throughout the presentation, is it's set to be massive. So that's the key takeaway. Numbers are debatable, and you'll see different numbers on different slides, but it is a massive compass point in the direction that is the growth of artificial intelligence between now and the next few years. And whenever you hear about AI, there'll always be questions thrown around, such as, will AI take over the world? Is it going to steal my job? All of these questions are valid, but also they usually come from a place of where a lack of understanding comes into effect, like with any emerging technology, but nonetheless so with artificial intelligence. And one of the key things here that I like to talk about in answer to will AI take all of our jobs is summed up in 2 words, so the automation paradox. And what we mean by the automation paradox really is stemming not just for AI, but any emerging technology, the essence that actually the more automated things become, the more there is a need for human intervention and actually complementary abilities for humans and machines to work with each other and not against each other. And this is purely based on the fact that we are still at a point where, despite what you might read or see in films, AI has not got to that stage where it can be fully, autonomous and unchecked without human intervention. And this is because there are still values like human judgment, reasoning, emotions that are innate within humans and our way of being that have not been fully replicated and are far from being replicated within artificial intelligence algorithms and systems. So when we talk about the automation paradox, and we've already seen it play out in fields such as the legal field. So when we look at the process of paralegals and the research phase known as discovery in law, when they're researching for cases, this was automated through machine learning and AI, and has massively reduced the amount of time that is spent in the discovery phase of a legal case, and has actually freed up so much more time for lawyers to spend in different elements of that of their case instead. So in terms of when we see the direction of AI going, it really is to decrease that amount of low-level tasks that we see and open up more horizons for us to explore different higher-level tasks actually that can be done by humans for the future as well. So that's, in terms of the relationship with people versus machines, how it is playing out versus what we're hearing in the media. Great. And in terms of the actual evolution of artificial intelligence as well, I think it's really important to talk about the fact that AI is nothing new, despite what we sometimes might think. It goes back as early, even on this slide, I know it says 1988, but actually it goes back as far as 1940, was where the first term was coined, and actually started out in aviation and private defense, because a lot of artificial intelligence is born in private laboratories, because that's where the money is for funding. But in terms of the customer experience and how we see it that play out, it first started with Amazon, actually. So we all know Amazon started as a bookstore, and they introduced in the 1980s collaborative filtering, which we know as recommendation systems. And what launched in 1980 was item-level collaborative filtering. So this was really new in terms of that it took what was a process known as grouping together. The collaborative nature of that title is in terms of the different relationships between customers. Now they shifted it towards the different relationships between products. So that was a breakthrough in terms of understanding not just what customers like in relation to each other, but how they buy products in relation to the different purchase histories that people would make through their transactions. So that was a really interesting step. And then in 2011, we all would have encountered Siri. And I know at that time it came into the market with very mixed reviews because of the type of maturity that voice recognition was at. And we'll come on to that later, and the voice recognition element of AI. But I'm sure at some point we can all remember shouting at Siri or insert your Alexa Google device at some point in the street because it was not working the way that it would if you were just talking to a normal human. And that essentially was one of the first, I guess, introductions to consumers on a mass level for just entry-level voice assistants and voice recognition technology to be in the palm of your hand. And then we fast forward a little bit further, 2015. This is where we have systems like Google. So if anyone's looked on the first page, which I'm sure everyone in here has, that was then powered by what was launched as Google RankBrain. So RankBrain essentially was plugged into the search engine recommendation pages, so the SERPs of Google, to help power more specific personalization based on user intent. So not just who the customer was, but actually what their signals and behaviors were, and how that tailored the content in much more focus than before for Google. So that was a really interesting development as well. And then we move on to 2017, 2020. There was a lot more growth in terms of how we saw customer service automation, chatbots, again, voice VPAs, voice personal assistants coming into the market and really just changing the dynamic, not just for people's daily lives, but between brands and the customer. And that fundamental shift in terms of what it meant to no longer send out push or pull marketing, but actually meet the customer halfway. And that was enabled and still is enabled by artificial intelligence. And we move forward now to that last bit where it says AI elevates the CX, to really look at the notion where artificial intelligence will power 95% of customer interactions by 2025. And this is not surprising by any means, given the fact that A, AI has been around for a while, and B, just the sheer proliferation of smartphones, the decrease in the cost of a lot of hardware as well, and also the explosion of computational power through the development of 5G and moving us towards things like 6G for mobile telecoms, is meaning that this is becoming much more of a reality and widespread adoption across customers and also businesses. So this is what will happen over the next few years. But in terms of how businesses are really looking to prioritize the implementation of AI systems and platforms, it's really interesting to actually see that the profile of this is geared a lot more towards problem solving, so efficiency, like you can see on the side here, and also towards the idea of helping to give a little bit more personalization as well. And this is really interesting, especially when we look at where travel industry sits on this slide, is that empathy is the least prioritized, but yet the most important aspect of customer experience. And I also think it's telling that travel seems to sit behind insurance, which is not good news, that insurance can come out more empathetic through AI systems. But we'll come into a little bit of more detail on how this is working across those different technologies. But this really paints a picture on the level of prioritization that we're seeing with the types of services on offer. And essentially, AI has a really great ability for us to translate our products into services. And that is particularly important when we've seen the shift that has happened over the pandemic, where it's not just about selling to the customer anymore, it's about balancing between serving or selling to the customer. And how we do that is really important, no matter what industry we're in. But obviously we're here for the yacht industry. So consumer behavior is definitely, confined to moving at the speed of culture, and it continues to evolve immensely and very quickly, which is the challenge that definitely keeps me coming back into the office and a lot of the clients that I work with. But really, this chart, I won't go through all the different touch points, but what I wanted to show is that there are 26 core touch points that span, unsurprisingly to everybody in this room, online and offline environments. And if I'm being completely honest as well, they are very much translatable between not just this industry or the purchasing of a yacht, like being retargeted by Google Ads, looking at your SEO, searching from your mobile device rather, that research online versus buying offline dynamic, it happens in many different industries. But the key here is that the ability and the challenge that we have in, whether it's chartering a yacht, buying, a pencil, is about collapsing the journey between desire, that initial wanting of the product, to discovery and destination, which is the final purchase and transaction. And this is where AI has seen massive benefits already in terms of just shortening that path to purchase exponentially. And it's particularly important as well when we think about an industry that is experiencing so much more automation. So we're seeing the smart yacht and also, things with like the e-yachts coming in as well, and sustainability and all of these trends that are coming through and actually becoming more defined, is actually the ability for us to then know that the bar is being raised continually, whether we're doing it for our customers or not. It continues to move because there is so much more automation embedded within yachts and infrastructure for crews, not just for customers, not just for booking agents, and that will continue to go. So it's a case of actually whether AI-enabled customer service isn't no longer just a nice to have, it will become a need to have, and already quickly is. And the way that we see businesses really moving is, like I mentioned earlier, from transactions towards interactions. And what I mean by that is not that we're no longer prioritizing a sale because nobody's in a charity business. We still are. It is about the reprioritization of where that effort is spent and actually what it means to give that, ROI, return on interaction. And there's 3 core mediums that we're seeing this happen with artificial intelligence. And the first is text interpretation, image recognition, and then voice recognition. And you'll see from the side here intentionally that text interpretation is deliberately not called recognition, because then if it's called text recognition, it can be confused very easily with image recognition. So that's just a semantic one that's important that I wanted to call out. But in terms of the text interpretation side of things, we're seeing a lot of advancements in terms of the way that this is impacting the customer experience in terms of things like contingency management, and that's the ability to help minimize disruption to your customers, and I'll give you an example in the travel industry in a moment, and basically be there in a much more proactive way. So not just there from a customer service standpoint when something goes wrong, but actually preempting before it goes wrong how you can help your customer navigate that challenge ahead of time, and then minimize the frustration on their end, on everybody's end. Secondly is relevance at scale. This is incredibly important when it comes to how we personalize the experience overall, but also in terms of how we just make sure we get the right content to the right customers at the right time as well, all of these things colliding. And the third is also conversational commerce, and I'll come on to that in a little bit more detail. But in terms of a couple of the 2 first ones, contingency management, relevance at scale, Qantas Airlines was one of the pioneers in terms of just being really a first mover and a first adopter of how they really embedded artificial intelligence in a text interpreted way within their systems. So what they did was they actually created a system in-house that would help be able to collect many different data sets across like time of day, weather, and then based on the different signals they were getting, they were able to then inform customers, but also from a B2B angle, the suppliers that they worked with, so maybe the catering companies, ahead of time, on if there were any delays or disruption that could be expected. And this massively improved the efficiency and also reduced costs for them as a business, because they were able to be on the front foot of anticipatory nature of what could happen, as opposed to the reactive side of damage control once it had. So this is a really great example of how AI can help us be on the front foot, but also minimize any kind of problems that we have throughout the customer experience as we go as well. But one more interesting one that I think kind of builds on this idea is conversational commerce. So we've all seen the explosion, like TikTok just this month has become the most downloaded social app. So as human beings, we are socially, we gravitate towards being social, but this has really come to fruition with the concept of conversational commerce, which is what it means to add much more natural kind of language and interaction throughout the commerce experience. KLM did a fantastic job a few years ago now when they launched their first chatbot, which helped handle up to 60% of queries were responded to through the chatbot. And I think what's really interesting as well is whenever you say the words chatbot, everyone just assumes it's a full bot. We're never talking to a human. And that's not true. The beauty of these types of technologies are, like I mentioned in the beginning, it's the kind of symbiosis between humans versus technology, and with these types of systems there is also the opportunity for us to escalate to humans when the decision tree that sits behind it becomes too complex for a chatbot to handle effectively. Instead of giving a subpar experience, we then hand off to an actual human customer service agent who can complete that interaction and allow it to be as seamless as possible. And that's exactly what KLM have done, and several other companies in many other industries as well. But like I said before, when we think about all of the different touch points that exist, this is a really great way of making sure that we can just keep the customer engaged and also be much more natural in terms of how we as businesses and brands engage with them throughout each step as well. So in terms of booking your flights, changing your flights, or even updating kind of your personal information on your account, all of that information is just massively made much more accessible to a wider pool of customers, but also in a much more relevant way. But where it gets really interesting, and the bit that I love the most, is called sentiment analysis. So sentiment analysis, the way to think about this is almost an evolution of what's like known as social listening. So that ability to ingest information that comes through in terms of different languages, different texts, different comments, all through social platforms, and also just any text-based document as well. And actually, this is a really powerful way because we all know that as users of our phones, but also as customers, we leave so much of data trailing behind us, and each of these little things are digital breadcrumbs in essence, and it's our job as businesses and as marketers to really refine each of these data points and turn those points into insights for people. And that's where sentiment analysis is really powerful, because what this does is gives us an inference not just to how customers think, but how they feel. So if you think about, the way I like to think about it is when Facebook first had the like or dislike button, customers aren't just a like or a dislike, they're not positive or negative or neutral. They span, like you can see in the image above, different emotions at varying levels and varying ends of the spectrum. So sentiment analysis can factor in multiple different emotions such as joy, fear, anger, sadness. And what that does is it assigns an individual value and weight to each of these emotions, and then allows businesses to therefore tailor how they approach that customer or how they serve their advertising to them, so that they can be far more targeted and precise in their communications. And that's one way in terms of tracking like campaign effectiveness as well, how people respond to you, not just your campaign, but also as a business. It's used a lot in crisis management as well, to be fair. And during election time, they use a lot of sentiment analysis. And then the second one to that is obviously improving the customer as well. And in terms of how we see that, it's really, the customer persona side is really interesting because, like I mentioned earlier, grouping different customers based on, their age, where they live is very outdated now. Now we can group customers on exactly, how they're feeling based on, the 30-second frame that they saw on your social post. And also because this is machine learning that we're working with, it gets stronger over time, hence the learning part. So what that means is we can also predict future customer groups as well, not just based on where a customer sits now, but where they might be when they have a family, or where they might be when there's been a different change in their life, like a work promotion. And all of this is enabled to be a much more clearer picture through technology like sentiment analysis that gives us much more of a four-dimensional understanding of who our customers are. Improving product quality is also a very unique way of using sentiment analysis. We can use it to infer the new product development process as well. So when we see people write their social posts about a toothpaste being too sensitive for their teeth or not minty enough, all of that information can be collected and mined to then inform the next iteration of a product, which can give invaluable recommendations to businesses for how best to serve their customer. And the final one, crisis management, which I've covered already. But just to summarize, that technology in itself, text interpretation, sentiment analysis, what this in essence, in a nutshell, really does is allow us to deliver high-touch experiences, high-tech experiences with a human touch. And I think that's really important when we think about these technologies, is it's not about being the shiniest or being the coolest with all of technology for technology's sake. It really is about solving a problem and meeting a customer need or need state, if we think about the emotional side of it. And I would just really like this quote. Marvin Minsky is often considered one of the pioneers of artificial intelligence, and the idea that actually intelligence is only achieved when machines are able to be emotionally intelligent, I think is exactly the crux of the matter, and why, again, it requires always kind of the intervention between humans and people, humans and machines, to make the most robust outcomes possible. And so moving on a little bit now, image recognition. So this is a really interesting field in terms of the ability to help machines interpret and make sense of the visual world around us and convert that into insight, is where image recognition truly shines. And we're seeing so much growth in terms of visual recognition, because essentially if a picture's worth 1,000 words, then AI can really help us filter out the relevant ones. And this is really important considering the fact that we are visual creatures. So the brain can process an image in 13 milliseconds. So it's an incredible quick amount of time that it takes for us to retain images. And that's also true because 80% as well of social posts contain imagery. So we can see that with the way that I said before, TikTok, visual platform, most downloaded app, Instagram, visual platform, and the growth of these in itself, Instagram's the second platform, biggest platform globally now as well. So this gives us a really interesting insight into how we can collect as much information as possible, not just through text like we went through in the beginning, but actually images are also becoming a key gateway to customer understanding. And the evolution of that has also been because we've moved from things like cataloging images, so just collecting databases. I don't know if anyone ever played it, but there was a game on Google where you could have to race against some stranger on whoever else in the world to label images as quickly as possible. And that was essentially a way of training Google's neural network to help label their images in what we call classification of imagery into different groups, so that it could power Google Lens, which now receives about 3 billion users each month in terms of the amount of usage it gets. It's phenomenal. So that shift as well has really shown how we've moved in terms of our behaviors as well, from just cataloging that towards actual transactions as well. And platforms like Pinterest are fast kind of really pioneering that ability for us to transact via visual search. And even towards not just the searching, but again, when we think about the entire customer journey, purchasing, selfie pay is becoming massively ingrained in customers' daily lives. This is my favorite video because in Asia, people are grabbing their parents to try and steal their money. Whenever I'm having a bad day, I look at this video and you can't not laugh. I recommend you all to save it. I'll share the link if anyone needs it. It's on YouTube. So we can see just how easy it's becoming to pay, to research, to target customers on both ends of the spectrum. And that is massively, really changing at a breakneck speed thanks to the continual development and growth across each of these technologies. a little bit closer to the field as well, image recognition is already being used for vessel detection. And what I mean by that is actually when we think about how boats are being identified mainly in lower level light conditions, so things like at night, to stop them from crashing into each other, to help monitor whether they can fit through the right docking station or the right berth. You can tell I don't work in this industry, but bear with me. But what that really is showing as well is, so this is using multiple technologies like graphics processing units, and also things like the vessel automatic identification systems, the AIS, to really be able to look in tough conditions where it might be low visibility, dark, stormy. This would not have been possible a decade ago, because now the technology has just matured so much that we're able to get so much more accuracy with these types of systems. And they're having massive benefits as well in terms of reducing casualties, improving, reducing like fuel emissions as well, because you can take the fastest route if you know that you can fit through one area as opposed to another route that might take you much longer way around. So this has image recognition, I think, is interesting because when we think about it, we often think of just like face recognition, and it actually spans so many different areas far beyond that, and so many different industries as well. And the ways that it's having an impact on the customer experience are massively through delivering more personalized content, and also developing the understanding of each customer profile that we have. And the final one for that as well is also through strengthening brand equity, and that's massively important when we think about having lasting relationships with customers. It's not just about getting the sale and moving on. Loyalty and where the sale ends is a massive factor that plays into this. One example, I think, CX is customer experience. Just shortening it, because it was just saving time. Pardon? Similar. So user experience is often used in a web development context for like the front end of your website, so like navigation, and CX is more like the whole experience, but very similar. Expedia is a really good example of a booking system that used really great and sophisticated deep learning to classify over 10 million images into 800 categories. So what I mean by that is they really understood that, again, understanding of the customer profile, business traveler, family travelers, solo travelers, which category each of these visitors to their site falls into, and how to actually engage with each of these customers quickly. Because essentially we all know that if you're looking for a hotel and it's showing you 10 pictures of the bathroom, you're probably going to move on. So that even the hierarchy of how the images are displayed is not to chance. It's all massively personalized and tailored based on a selection of data points that have been pulled in, and also which profiling has been done. So, for example, business travelers, they learned that they like to see more images of the gym and the hotel pool, whereas families like to see more images of the interior of the bedrooms. So that insight massively helped kind of shift the improvement that they had in bookings, but also dwell time. So the amount of time a user spends engaged on the website was around about 2 minutes, which is considered very good in an e-commerce context as well. So this is a great way that also have massively saved time. That amount of classification would take a team much longer to do than it would an AI system. So this is a really good example. The final one is one of my favorite areas, voice recognition. So we've seen, like I said, since really Siri was, implemented in 2011 and at such a large scale, we've seen a lot more adoption of voice technology and the accuracy improving. So when we think about voice technology, another bit of terminology for you, last one I promise, is natural language processing. So NLP really helps machines interpret and understand, but also be able to respond to human language and queries. And this is a really integral part of voice recognition. And what this often does as well is it takes in different elements of speech, so how fast you speak, the tone that you have, the words that you're using, and then is able to make an adjustment and then also respond appropriately in a split second. Now, speech recognition accuracy is at 95%. which is considered very good. And what I think is more interesting, though, is there is 5% between it being perfect. And that difference in 5% is the difference between us using it every week or the difference between us using voice technology every single day. So there is still a little bit more of a way to go in terms of voice recognition accuracy being perfect, because as we all know, how many people in the room have a smart speaker? Oh, okay. Quite a few. Okay. And I'm sure, as you know, sometimes they work still, sometimes they don't, and that is because we're still not fully there in terms of the accuracy being fully robust. So we have a little bit more advancement to go. But I think in terms of why voice recognition technology is so important is because of how our brains work. So when we think about how we use this type of tech, so to type on a computer, we type about 40 words a minute. When we speak, we use about significantly more, so 150 around in a minute. And from a neuroscience standpoint, our brains are wired to ease the cognitive load. So that is a weird way of saying we take the path of least resistance, and we just like it being easy. So that's where voice recognition is massively helpful, because it instead allows us to in a really short amount of time, just be able to give a query and get a response as quickly as possible, and without looking at a screen as well. So this is where we've seen 3 different ways in terms of the brand utility, voice recognition being massively useful in terms of the hands-free nature of it, and us being able to help, car services like Audi was a great example. They used one for their after-sales service, where they could help mechanics go through the repair service using voice recognition, so they don't have to keep referring to their tablet or their phone or their laptop. Driving convenience as well goes hand in hand with that, and then also increasing customer engagement. And one example of a platform that has become really strong in all 3 of these is called Cogito. So they work on a B2C and B2B context, and they really helped in terms of the customer call center engagement. So what they do is have a machine learning system that essentially helps to coach customer call agents into giving a little bit more maybe empathy, maybe speaking slower. It prompts each person to tailor how they engage with customers for each phone call, because they were finding that maybe towards the end of a customer service agent's shift, they were getting quite tired and might be rushing through to get to the end of the call, or might not be as empathetic because they were on their 300th call. And this is where the coaching really helped give them the necessary prompts just to keep them alert to maybe things that they might not have been, because we're all human and we all get tired. So this was a really one that was massively adopted by MetLife, the global insurance provider, to basically transform the way that they dealt with customer calls. And just to kind of come to the near end portion of this, I just wanted to also ask, I guess, do another poll, is when you have heard about artificial intelligence either for the first time, how many of you heard about AI maybe doing something that it shouldn't have? Or how many of you can name an AI use case that is actually benefiting the world? Can anyone name me a good one that's benefiting the world, either saving the environment, saving a human? No? Does anyone remember Twitter's racist chatbot that was tweeting out racist tweets? Pardon? Anyone?
I remember the racist Twitter.
Yeah. Or moderating some of the election content and tailoring that to be more focused on one party over the other. Usually, I just want to say stage 3, I learned Croatian for you. I needed a little bit more engagement back. But basically what I wanted to say on that, the point of this one is, whenever I ask, and also having been through that process myself, is everyone can name an instance where AI has gone rogue. Very few people can name when AI is actually really benefiting the planet. And again, this is where Heartificial comes in, but also where we act a lot through our understanding of machine learning out of fear. And I know because I work in the advertising industry, and there's a lot of sensationalization that happens when it comes to artificial intelligence. So I wanted to share with you a few use cases where AI has really helped, just so that you can have those in the back of your mind the next time someone asks you that question. So Microsoft developed Seeing AI. So this is, again, using a combination of visual recognition to basically extend what's humanly possible. And what I mean by that is it was developed by an engineer at Microsoft who I've worked with. He's a lovely man, and he was blind. So accessibility technology, so assistive technologies that help people with visual impairments or physical impairments, is where AI and machine learning are really powerful. So what this does is it uses deep learning to be able to detect things like product labels. I can play that again for you if anyone missed it. Things like product labels, what currency somebody has on a banknote, and then it annotates it out to them by speaking. This is a €5 note. This is a tin of Campbell's soup. It has 500 calories in it, so you can buy it because you're on a diet this week, like whatever. So this is a really great example of how it's basically opened up not just assistive technologies, but also because they made this app for free, it combined different layers of product identification and also kind of navigation that would have actually existed in 3 different apps. So it was a really useful way that they were able to give that to such a specific community of people for free. Final one is in Australia, deep learning has really changed the way that they're looking at things like suicide rates on train platforms. So that this is a massive area that has basically grown in Australia and many other countries actually as well, but has massive implications for not just the person who commits suicide, but bystanders, train drivers. So it's really been an area that people have wanted to try, and governments and councils have wanted to try and get more of a handle on. And they were able to create a neural network that could take in different signals like how close a person was standing to the edge of a platform based on the image detection, how much they were pacing back and forth on the platform, what time of the day it was when they were doing it, and basically create like a risk index in a way that would take somebody in a CCTV control room much more time and energy to observe. So this, when it happens, it then flags onto the CCTV control room an alert to basically say, maybe just go and ask them if they need directions or something very subtle, and if they need help. And it reduced the level of suicides by a significant amount just in the pilot that they ran over 6 months, and is being scaled out to other cities as well. So really interesting way of looking at how artificial intelligence is helping societies instead of hurting it. Final quiz that I wanted to do with you is, this is not anything new. I'm sure some people in the room have already seen it. There is a point that I'm going to make on this one that might be a bit different, but the trolley problem. Philosopher, engineers, and humanitarians have debated around this for centuries. But really, in artificial intelligence, this is the code of ethics that is basically what a lot of ethical AI is being built on, and I use the term ethical very loosely because it's not a perfect exercise by any means. So we have scenario A, where the car's moving and it will hit pedestrians who are crossing on a red light, or scenario B, where the car could swerve and hit the bollard or the barricade and kill the driver but save the people on the crossing. So, you know, it's one of those situations where there was when we build out the ethics for AI, basically, it's one of the most difficult areas, and why I'm so interested in it. So there's about 25 different definitions of fairness in data science, and machine learning maybe answers only 2 of those definitions. So you can see the lack of standardization and understanding is why it's such a difficult field for anyone to get a agreement on. But for the purpose of now, I would like people to choose. If you would choose scenario A and go for the pedestrians because they've chosen to cross during a red light, put your hand up.
Does the dog count as half a person or 2?
Good question, Chris. I'm going to say half because there's already a lot of bodies on that crossing, so I'm going to say half. Half a person with a dog. Anyone for A? Oh, okay, we've got 1 for A. Thank you for putting your hand up, not for killing the people. Scenario B. Who's going for B, where you're just going to crash into the bollard? Okay. So I like this exercise because a lot of people use this exercise to determine the actions somebody would take. I use this exercise to determine the intentionality people have. And what I mean by that is most people did not put their hands up. That's the real problem. So if you chose A or B, you're actually one of the good people. Yes. Not, I wouldn't get in a car with you or I wouldn't cross in front of you, but you're one of the good ones. What I want to say is, when it comes to ethics, silence is not an option. It doesn't rest on the shoulders of journalists, engineers, or tech companies to solve the ethics debate. It relies on people like us in these rooms and forums who are just curious to know more and have the, awareness to take the conversation further, where ethics, who can truly make a difference when it comes to ethics. So, yes, question?
Boyan from ACI Marinas. Why isn't there option C?
So there is an option C always, and that is to choose not to be silent and to choose another option that is not up there. What would your option C be, would be my question.
For instance, braking or turning with a handbrake, automatic handbrake, because I expect a self-driving car to have automatic handbrake. There are a lot of options for case C. Maybe AI should go in that way.
I guess when we said
C.
the license to use an option C, I think it's more around C to mitigate the problem. I think what we have in this field is that there are only certain courses that we can take between right and wrong with AI, and as much as we want to try and create a panacea where everything is fine, or utopia rather, it doesn't exist. So we have to commit to one or the other. How do we navigate that? So for me, I think that's where we're seeing it. I don't think pulling the handbrake, I mean, there's been a few casualties, and I know sometimes that isn't enough. So it's more around how we can use the technology for those. But I see what your point is. I think, pardon? We should take B. So basically, there is no right answer. Yeah, there is no right answer to this one. What I will tell you is that a study was done, and it was done across Europe, and culturally, there was some really interesting differences between countries that protected the women and the children on the crossing versus countries that just wanted to save the driver. It's really interesting, and I think this is the whole point, is that there is no consensus on it. There isn't a right answer in this exercise. It's merely an indicator of what actions people take and how informed they are when they take them or not. But yeah, it's an interesting one. There's so many more, exercises like this as well that you can do, and I can share a link to that around these trolley problems. But really what I wanted to kind of say with that is that what it really shows is that AI is not a magic wand by any means. I think when we have a technology like any disruptive tech that is so powerful and has what can only be seen as limitless capacity, actually it's not a magic wand that can solve all of our problems. It purely reflects back what's contained within it. And what I mean by that is that when it comes to ethics, it's massively in the eye of the beholder, which is why it's really important to be educated not just at an engineering level for the people who build the technology, but for those that use it, implement it, etc. So I want to leave you with 4 lessons to avoid putting the AI in fail. The first one, see what I did there? The first one is, it's really important when we think about it to, again, like I mentioned earlier, deliver high-tech experiences. I always get it the wrong way around. High-tech experiences with a human touch. Again, having worked not just in the AI field, but in the digital transformation space, I find it really interesting that the more technical things become, people assume the less human we should be in response, and that's not the way forward by any means. It's actually the opposite. Second is learn the rules of engagement when it comes to artificial intelligence. AI is not for everybody, and that's coming from somebody who loves it as much as I do. I don't say that it's for everyone to adopt. It's about looking at what problems you're trying to solve, what needs need to be met, and how AI can best be an enabler of that. I have a trick that I use where I say to someone, if you talk about artificial intelligence to a client and you can go the meeting without saying it until the last sentence, you've done your job right, because you're leading with the rest of the content, and AI is an enabler that facilitates what you're trying to achieve. Third is evaluate how equipped you are to deliver everyday ethics throughout your product services and mitigate the risk to the end users as well. So this is, honestly, it's such a difficult area to solve, and no one has fully cracked it yet. So I'm not saying that rests on the shoulders of anyone in this room. It's more around just getting a little bit more informed in the ways that we can help reduce bias in our own thinking and our own organizations when it comes to artificial intelligence. And the final one, again, thinking all of these can be applied outside of AI as well, to be fair, is in a world where we can be always on, and when commerce and culture and content and advertising move at the speed of culture, don't seek to be always on, seek to be always interesting, is one thing that I like to say, because being always on is good, and not always necessary for every brand or business, but to be always interesting is usually where you'll gain the most engagement from your customers, but also the most virtuous relationship as well over time between elevating your product into a service. So that is what I'd like to leave you with. Thank you very much. If you have any other questions, feel free to ask when I'm around, but yeah, thanks.